This week on the Donut Box podcast, we talk about the different areas we served in at church. Which areas did we serve in? I'll actually tell you, it was all of them.
You get to find out what all of them actually means. Did it violate child labor laws at the time? Did it give us church hurt? And did we heal from it? We're going to find out this week on the Doughnut Box podcast. So let's roll that intro. Hi, I'm Micah.
And I'm Chris.
And we've been friends for over 20 years.
Surprisingly, we haven't killed each other yet. Years ago, we started our own variety show, and it sucked.
Now that we're adults, we decided to give it another try. Like in the movie, life is like a box of donuts. You never know which one's gonna be the next one.
Wait a second, it's chocolates.
Oh, right. Okay, well, let's start the show.
This is the Donut Box podcast.
Well, Micah, it's another week, another wonderful day on the Donut Box podcast. If you are listening to us on any audio platform, we encourage you to hop over to YouTube to see our wonderful smiling faces, where you can go find us at DOUGHNUT Box Podcast, and it'll be great. And so we got a great show for you today. I'm excited about our free flow episode. We're talking about different things this week.
Yeah, as we alluded to in the intro, we're going to talk about the jobs that we had in church, the volunteer jobs that we had. I mean, they were volunteer, but more like voluntold in some bits. And we're going to talk about some of our favorite ones, some of our least favorite ones, why we're so well versed in the world, and where our work ethic, I think, comes from a little bit. And so I'm super excited. Chris, I want to start off with a question for you. Typically, our free flow episodes, sometimes we ask questions back and forth to each other. This week, not so much. But the question I have for you, we're going to start with good, with positive. Do you have a maybe a favorite job that you had in the church, or maybe something that you really enjoyed doing there?
Yeah, so I enjoyed getting to be part of the tech team and the Usher team, which happened later on in my teenage years as I became an older teen. And so I first got into the tech team because my dad was somehow serving in that area. And I think a lot of the reasons why I served in different areas was probably because my dad served there and was like, hey, you're going to go help me do X, Y, or Z. But I remember my dad serving, and then I remember I got in contact with, I don't know if he was taking over at that time, but his name was Tim. And so I just remember being like, yo, what's up? And he was like, okay, you and me are the only other volunteers on this team. So I'm going to teach you. Then I wrote my buddy Micah into it.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's funny how you describe him to talk. It was more like, yo, man, yeah. So we're going to do this tech team thing, man, and we're going to show you how to do this thing. He was a cool guy. We used to call him Timbo Slice. He didn't like that very much. But I remember Chris came up to me on Sunday, and this job was in the back. It was in a glorified closet, really. It was kind of like I wouldn't say an electrical closet, but it was like a closet where a lot of the cords and cables for
Like
the
the
technical
modem.
aspects,
Yep.
yeah, for the church was kept. But they had a desk back there, bunch of TVs, and basically they called this room the TriCaster room. And this was really ahead of its time. Pretty much all churches now, especially after COVID, they put their services online to some capacity. Well, our church had been doing this for a while. They started off when we first started going there. It was really big to do CDs and DVDs. And so I even remember they had a little table out front. They even had a little Christian bookstore too that they would sell them in, but they had a little table out front, and they would like sell these CDs and DVDs if you wanted to see. And this was also back in the day when they had Sunday night services. And so I remember there would be like the Sunday morning, and then Sunday night, it's like, hey, if you want to have the sermon from today and you want to purchase that, you're more than welcome to do so. Then that eventually transitioned to online to the website. So I was in late middle school going into high school, and Chris was already in high school, failed the fourth grade twice, had to go through that bad boy twice. And listen, No Child Left Behind, made sure I didn't go through it 3 times. You know what I'm saying?
If it makes you feel any better on that note, like your birthday was August, like summer birthday. And so it was like, okay, well, you could have been in either or. So
Yeah,
it's like
I
not
really could have.
you failing the the 4th grade, it didn't make you feel that much older than your
Oh
classmates.
no, I was teased about it, but it really wasn't a big deal. That, and we can go into this another time. I went through Department of Defense schools, and let me tell you, they're a little behind. Anyways, so we were, Chris was already into it, and I remember he came to me and he said, he actually didn't really ask me. It really was, I wouldn't say complaining, but he was like, man, it's kind of hard these days because Tim, who was directing the thing, I don't know, I think he had something else going on at the time or something like that. And so pretty much how the back worked was there was 2 consoles. There was these 2 boxes, right? And one of them had a joystick and a selector, and there was 4 cameras that were out on the floor, and they were controlled with this joystick in the back. On top of that, the other box was a fader box. So pretty much back in those days, now it's very popular to just do hard cuts, cut screens, that sort of thing. Back in those days, it was very, very common to fade. So, it had an auto fader to it, which was high speed, high tech at the time, and then it had a little fader bar and whatnot. Anyways, I say all that to say this. Chris was kind of like, man, it's pretty difficult because I'm having to control these cameras and fade at the same time and make sure that all of this is going according to plan. You can do it, but really and truly, it is a 2-person job. And so I said, well, do you think they would let me back there? Because at the time, again, Chris is in high school, and how our church hierarchy worked is once you move to high school, it kind of opened up more jobs for you. But if you're still in the kind of that middle school going into high school range, it's like, we don't want you running, especially things you're putting online and stuff like that. So I said, do you think they would let me back there? And I remember him telling me, he's like, well, it's only me back there. So yeah, I think it's fine. Like, I don't think anybody's going to say anything. And so, okay, that's fine. The other camera was out on the floor, and somebody had to run that too. But at the time, we had people to run it, and that was camera 5, and it was the big boom camera. But you would basically flip back and forth to all these cameras. And so I remember going back there and running the fader. Now, I love this, and this sounds kind of bad, but all the other ministries that we served in were very people facing. Like, you had to be very on your P's and Q's and things like that. And especially because they knew your parents. So the moment you did something wrong, they're going to your parents and like, hey, your kid, da 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 da. And especially hanging out with Chris, we like to talk crap. So the thing was, it's like we would say some things and whatnot. And so we had to really watch ourselves in front of people. Now, this being in the back of the church, we didn't really have to do a lot of that, and we were still serving. I mean, we were serving.
The only people who walked back by were like staff members or people like making their way, or the choir that was making their way from the back of the church to the
front, from the choir suite to the front there. And so I got involved, and it was pretty fun for a while. I would say probably the first 6 months that I joined, it was pretty fun because it was just Chris and I. There was somebody else, and it was kind of a rotation of who would run that camera 5 out on the floor. So it was Chris and I in the back. And I'll tell you this much. One of my favorite parts of this job was finding crowd shots. So pretty much our main job was just during worship. So they had however many songs during worship, probably 4 or 5. And so you would pan, you would get all the different, all the different shots that you're looking for. And Chris and I had a pretty good flow because, I don't know, he and I could read each other pretty well. If he's already moving a camera, I know he's going to want to fade to that. So I'm already selecting that thing, and we're already like working out, okay, here's how you're going to fade it and whatnot. And then sometimes we would switch off and do things like that. But after worship was over, our pastor, he had some health problems, unfortunately, but he was stationary. Like, he had a stool on stage, so he would just stay in one place. So pretty much it was like after worship, hey, our job's pretty much done. Now it's time to kick back and chill out for a little bit. But we had to find crowd shots. If you've ever watched an online stream, we were also trying to be like almost, I wouldn't say like TV televangelist-esque, but if you've ever seen some of like the big preachers on TV, you always have to have the crowd shots, right? You always have to have they would say a point, and then they, kind of had the crowd shot where people are writing something
just looking
or whatever.
for people who are like paying attention really well. And the frustrating part would be like, you get to someone and you'd be like, "Oh, yeah, they're paying attention really well." And then as soon as you fed it to them, they would do something like yawn or like pick their nose and you're just like, "Oh, man." Or they'd be like doing something. You're just like, "Oh my gosh."
Or
But
even, sorry, or even it wouldn't necessarily even be them. Sometimes it'd be people around them. Like it'd be like somebody they'd be sitting there and they'd be all focused or they'd be writing something down, and then there'd be somebody like over there. They'd be like, "No, you shut up," with their friend or something, and you're just like, "Bro, what do you stop?" Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
oh yeah, but it was always funny because you could always like spy on people at church because you just be like, "Oh yeah, they're so and so," but like, what are they doing? Like, "Oh yeah, they were definitely picking their nose in church," and
Oh yeah.
or this and that. And then we it was always funny because we'd always like there was one camera that was directly above the pulpit, so we would like zoom into the notes and be like, "Okay, where is he at right now? Is
Where's
he
he
about to
at in the
close?"
sermon?
Because that's the
Yeah.
pastor's thing. Like every pastor tell you, "Okay, I'm about to close," but you know if they say that, you still got 30 more minutes like
At
left.
least. And
Yep.
we're trying to make it to the Cracker Barrel, you know what I mean? And so what I think was also funny too, we also used to like that's how we found out it's like some of the dating scene too. We would
Uh-huh.
zoom into like some of these girls and we'd be like, "Who's she sitting with? She's sitting with Cody? Are they dating right now?" And then it's like that's how you be finding out stuff anyways. So we had a really good time there for a little bit, just the two of us. And then so Tim came back, which that's not a problem. And so he started, I wouldn't say cracking the whip more, but it's like, all right, we're not going to be screwing around nearly as much. I remember, what was the quote, Christopher? What
It
was
was
the
maximize the message and minimize distractions, and so he was like, "We're gonna try to be revolutionary. We're gonna try to find different shots, this and that." And so he was really helping us like be creative and kind of just take it to a next level, which I appreciate.
yeah.
But yeah, but then I guess he was like, "Okay, I need to start recruiting more volunteers for this team." And so he recruited a couple more volunteers, and it was like, okay, once he started recruiting those volunteers, I don't know if he recruited them or they just saw us coming out or like being in there and hanging out, and so they would just come in and hang out. They wouldn't really do anything.
Yeah, and we had the people who were running the camera that was out on the floor, camera 5, they stopped volunteering themselves, and so it became a rotation between Chris and I. It really wasn't anybody else that was doing it. It was like week after week it became either Chris was in the back and I was out on the floor, or Chris was on the floor and I was in the back, which of course kind of defeated the purpose, right? It kind of sucked because it was like, oh man, now we're, and especially the people who were in the back at this time, Christian and Darren. I'm just going to say their names. Oh, Christian and Darren. And they came back there and they were just two good friends. Christian was, I don't know if you could call him a good old boy. Like he wanted
He
to
was
be
a
a
good
good
old
old
boy.
boy. And so he was a good old boy. And Darren was not a good old boy, but he wanted to be one. And so it was just constantly, and we would try to tell them, like, hey, why don't one of you guys go out there and run camera 5? And it was always like, nope, 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 we're not going to do
There's
that.
always an excuse.
It was always an excuse of some kind. And they're just like, we're like the technical directors. And it's like, okay, that's what Tim does. So what are you guys doing here? And so I remember it got pretty tense after a while because I remember getting really frustrated with them and being like, dude, if y'all aren't going to do anything, why are you just hanging out back here? It's like, this is our spot. No,
Yeah, they kind
but
of blew up our spot because they would just like hang out and everything, and it was like, man. And then for some reason, Tim let Christian start directing, and I was like, I've been here longer than anybody. Like, I can direct, and I was like, it doesn't matter either way. But like I think I would say Darren maybe ran camera 5 once or twice, but Christian never ran camera 5, and we were like, bro, you got to run camera 5 at some point. You can't just be back here like just chilling. So
well, I don't even remember him running the fader or the joystick either. Like I always remember it being us doing those things. And there was another guy, Xander, who started, and I remember like he would do things sometimes, but it was mainly, how do I put this? He was not overly technical, so you had to give him the easy jobs. Like the fader was probably the easiest job. So I remember having to give that to him and being like, okay, but you would have to spell everything out like, okay, I'm going to this camera, which means you need to cue this up. And like, it was a whole thing. And so messing with our flows, it started messing with
Yeah.
our flows quite a
So
bit.
there was during this time, this was also when like I was like editing a lot of videos for the church and everything. So when I edited those videos, that's where like the camera equipment and stuff was. So I would go to that room to edit. And I remember there was this one particular children's pastor, and every time we saw him, he wouldn't stop and be like, "Hey, how are you doing?" You would get roped into helping him for like hours, and you're just like, "Bro, I got to get stuff done today. Like, I'm trying to work on this video that they gave me." And I remember one time we saw it because it was every single time, like without fail. And I remember one time, like, we saw him rounding the corner, and me and Micah took off and we ran into the TriCaster room and we hid under the table because there was this big window that you could see into the room. And I remember like he can't see us because if he walks by and see us, he's gonna come into this room and ask us to do something. And we ran in there and we like hid under the tables, and there was another guy that was in there uploading the sermon, and he just kind of looked at us and was like, we didn't say nothing, but we were just kind of like, shh.
Yeah, we just kind of like, hey, and I remember that guy walked past, and it was one of those things. That guy that was in there uploading the sermon, he would drive every week from Atlanta, and his job was literally just to edit, and upload the sermon. So
I think he
it
also was
was,
on the other end too of like when it was being recorded, and he would like kind of monitor like the audio levels, and like he was monitoring stuff on the other end to make sure it turned out good.
yeah, quality control, if you
Yeah.
will. Because I do remember him saying some things if like things were a little messed up or things like that. Now, I'll tell you this much, going back to the whole camera 5 thing, beyond, okay, I'm not with my buddy Chris in the back and whatnot. What was hard about camera 5? So putting stuff online is pressure, sure, but it's not as much pressure. Why I did not like running camera 5 was this was also the main camera. They had 2 big screens up there, and yeah, they would put lyrics and things like that, but when the pastor is preaching or whatever, you have to keep the focus on him because everybody in the church is watching your work go up right there. It's a live feed. And so I was used to hate that job. It wasn't too big of a deal with the pastor who was sitting down, but it was always like guest pastors. Those were always the worst. The Pentecostal-esque guys who would run up and down the stage, bro, they were so hard to keep up with a ton of the times. And so it was always like, man, I got to be out here. And not just that, but you have to be really, really on your game and really on par. And I don't know why. This is just life in general, but I don't know. Maybe you were like this too. The weeks that it's like, nope, you're running camera 5. It's like, bro, this is the week I'm the most tired. I really don't have it this week, but okay. Like, I guess I'm going to have to. And so I really didn't like that. But I remember going back to what I loved about this, and I'll let you get back to what you loved about this too, is I really loved, especially when it was just you and I, the creativity that we got to put on there. So we did watch this. It was a cheesy Christian station there in town, WBPI, but they would have like different panning motions and things like that. And that's where we would kind of, or just TV in general. And we'd be like, "Ooh, I want to try that next week with whatever." And so I remember doing some like dynamic shots. You were talking about the camera that was like overshot. I remember we like took it and we like zoomed in on the piano player like playing, and we like slowly zoomed out, and then we did like a half fade into them into the choir. It was like we tried a whole bunch of crap, but it was one of those things that was like, "Ooh, that's good. That's really good." And I always enjoyed kind of just being creative with that aspect of it and just being able to have the creative liberty to just try whatever.
Yeah, there were definitely some cheesy filters on the transitions. So I remember at the end of service one time, like it was running long and it was already done, and pastor was like, "We're gonna do a celebration of something God has done, and like you're welcome to leave, but we're gonna stand here and we're gonna sing." I remember like they were literally like singing celebrate good times, and there was this transition thing where there could be like
Confetti and
balloons and
balloons,
confetti like
yeah.
falling down between the shots, and like
Yeah,
you would fade it and the balloons would go up and then it would go in another shot. And then there was one with like money or something, and like the money would
yeah, I
come
remember that
down
one.
and like it was like raining money. And so it was always fun to like do stuff like that. I remember, I don't know why, but I remember this one particular time, and this has nothing to do with running tech, but it kind of does. So there was this one time, and before me and Micah had to transition to running camera 5, it was either my dad who would run camera 5 or this guy named Richard, and they were older guys. And so there was this time where for Easter I played the role of Jesus, and so the whole thing is like it's kind of like shadow miming to where the actors are behind the screen and like you're seeing all the shadow stuff. But then in the big moment where like Jesus comes out of the tomb, the angels like pull the screens back and Jesus is like standing there. And Jesus like walks through the crowd, right? So I remember walking through the crowd like kind of with my arms like I'm doing this for the shot, but my arms were like this, like to the side. And I was walking and it got to this really narrow funnel part where the camera was like right here. And then there was this guy sitting in the wheelchair right here. And when I walked by him, like the robe like just kind of brushed up against him. And I remember the camera guy afterwards, he was like, yeah, he was like, you totally smacked that guy in the face with your robe. And I was like, maybe Jesus was going to heal him with the robe of the garment. And not that I'm Jesus or anything, but I was like, maybe,
But metaphorically,
metaphorically,
as a
maybe that was
symbol.
his healing.
And ladies and gentlemen, just to rat Chris out, he had that picture of him as Jesus as his profile picture for like the longest time, of like him walking down the aisle like this
I
with
think
his sideburns.
on my sideburns and my little goatee.
Yep.
Jesus had
Yep.
sideburns and a little goatee. And I remember there were a couple ladies who I rizzed up with that picture. They were like, "Oh, you look so cute, being Jesus." I was like, "Yeah, girl, I know."
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So
So during that time, once it started getting too much, and it got to be where like Christian and Darren were kind of running the show, and like Tim was kind of, I think Tim had just got married. He was doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and so that's when we were kind of like getting into the phase of like, yeah, you know what, we're not gonna stay at church for the service today. We'd be
yeah,
like, that's we go to the TriCaster room and be like, okay, this room's getting too packed. And then me and Micah would decide, hey, where do you want to go eat for lunch right now?
yeah. And so we did that. I remember we also found out that okay, because there was an early service and a late service. In the early service, you had to film two, but it was kind of like the B-roll. It was like just in case the main service didn't work out, the backup service. So it wasn't a lot of pressure. And everybody was so used to us being in the back during these times to where it was like, yeah, we were back there working it. And so it was like, okay, where do you want to go to lunch? And that's when we started going to Hooters on Sundays
And CC's, sometimes
and
Cracker Barrel,
CC's.
sometimes Golden Corral.
Yeah, but Cracker Barrel was expensive. I remember them CC's times; they were good. I went to CC's the other day; they don't fell off.
But do you remember we'd go back there and like we'd be talking with it, and Xander would be sitting there. He'd be like, "Oh, that's cool. Y'all are gonna go eat." And I could tell he secretly wanted us to like invite him, but we were like, "Nah, fam. Somebody got to come run the camera 5, and it's not gonna be
Yeah,
me."
yeah, it's not going to be me because we're going to be over at the Hooters this week. And so, yeah, we started doing that, and I think a lot of that just had to do with us being burnt out. As much as we liked the job, that's not all that we were doing, and so I guess that's kind of a good prelude to some of the other jobs that we had done prior to this point. You had talked about being an usher. I enjoyed being an usher too, but it was also hard work. I do remember there being times where it was like, okay, we had to choose between TriCaster or Usher. And then there were some times there was like, okay, we might have to do both in one Sunday. We might have to do early service TriCaster. We might have to go to Sunday school, be an usher, and literally, so we were at a different post for every bit of the service. But really, we became ushers, and Chris and I became ushers at the same time. And it was because we dressed nice, I guess.
All we wore was jeans, boots, and a sport coat with like a nice button-up shirt. And I
And
guess
a
that
bolo
was
tie. Like I'd wear a bolo
yeah,
tie.
I guess that was the criteria of being an usher. As long as you were wearing a sport coat, that was your criteria of being an usher. Who
Like, hey, it
recruited
was
you?
cool.
You remember who recruited you?
Mr. Ashley. Mr.
Okay.
Ashley, and he was like the head usher. And I remember he came up to me and said, "Hey, like we're short." And again, this was for the early service. It started off with the early service, and again, it was funny because it was an unsaid thing, but the early service didn't have as many people. It was mainly older people, so it was kind of they didn't care who they threw in there kind of thing. The 11 o'clock was the prime time service. Like
Yeah.
that's the service that is like the prime time. And so I remember starting off in the early service and they said, and he said, yeah, they had these balconies like on the side. They were kind of by stadium standards, you would call them pillbox balconies. They were like these
Yep.
square balconies. And so it was two tiered, but for the early service, there wasn't enough people. So they would open up the bottom ones, but not the top ones. So I remember starting off in the bottom ones and going around, and I did not know what I was doing like at all. The only reason I knew was I assumed nobody like taught me how to do it and said like, hey, here's how to be an usher. I just was like, okay, every Sunday I watch them do this. You can do this. It's like just skip a row and then collect the one that the guy just handed down this row and just like keep going down the line. And that's the only reason that I had any ideas, just because I went to church my whole entire life and then watched so many people do this. But this church was a little different. And Chris and I kind of had a conversation about this the other day. Some people have collection plates. This church had bags. So it was like two handles on each side, but it was kind of like a, was it velvet, would you say? Or
Yeah,
like,
velvet bag.
it was a velvet bag. And so everybody would, kind of handle it all the way down, literally. And so it was pretty interesting. But yeah, it was kind of just like hey, we need somebody, get in there, and no training, just on the spot. You got this covered, kid.
Yeah, but they gave us the top balconies because they were like, okay, that's easy for you. So, and like top balconies, there weren't that many people up there. And a lot of like the youth would go sit up there or like the people who couldn't find a seat. So I remember they just gave the whole section to like, you would have the top left balcony section by yourself, and I would have the top right balcony by myself. So I would do that, and we sat in the top left balcony section for a while. And
Yeah,
so,
we did.
um, pass the bag, right? And so then once you pass the bag, then once you're done, all the ushers together, you have to go to the back room. And that's where they counted the money, or they would put it in the collection, whatever safe. I don't know what it, but I remember like there was also connection cards, everything. So once you got back there, you would have to dump your bag out and then like separate cash, checks, and then like collect our connection cards or whatever it was. And so I remember me and Micah one time, there was like nobody in our section. So we like went down there and we went to the back and we both got in there before everybody else. They were like, don't you ever come back here without.
I mean, they correct me if I'm wrong, but they like yelled at us. I remember like I had never seen the guy so mad. Like he was like mad. He was like, "Don't you ever come back here before we're back here or anything." He was like, "Oh shoot!" And I had never seen this guy mad before. But yeah, we were already back there counting the bread. Like we were like, "Okay, we're gonna get this done quick." And boy, we got chewed out. We got chewed out for that whole thing. Which
That was fun. And then I remember one time I got moved to the main floor. We both got moved to the main floor.
Yep.
We were like,
ooh,
in
can't
the
mess
little
this up.
balconies, nobody can see us, but it's like, "Oh, we better do good." So they put us on the main floor again.
That was the other thing too, was those balconies were dark. I remember sometimes it was even hard because there were steps going up there, and I was just like, don't trip," because it was dark up there. And then the other part of the job that they never taught us how to do and things like that, and it was kind of just off of observation, was seating people. So like in the main sections, it was a little bit more prevalent. Like Chris said, a lot of times it was like youth people, really and truly people who were like, I wouldn't say like they're going up there to be promiscuous, but maybe they were going up there to like, put their arms around each other so nobody would see them, or people who came in late. Like if you come in like 15, 20 minutes, like they were, how do I put this? The ushers were a little bit the balcony, like go to the balcony kind of thing. And so I don't know. Yeah, but we got moved to that main floor and it was just like, oh, we're in the prime time now. We're in the prime time now. And I remember even rehearsing it, even though we had done this for weeks at this point, I'm sitting here like every other row. Don't screw this up. Everybody's watching. And yeah, go ahead.
That was almost kind of like I don't know. It was almost kinda like, "Oh, yeah, all the eyes are on you." Even when you were still coming down from the back, because you would walk to the back, so everyone saw you, and we were, like, obviously the youngest ones there. We were the youngest, we were teenagers, and so
By
only
far,
like
actually.
yeah, only teenagers on the team, and so it was like, "Oh, wow, like, look at us moving up in the world." I remember one
Yeah.
I brought a friend to church. I remember sitting, like, on the side balconies, and they were like, "Can you usher today? You're wearing sport." I was like, "Nah, sitting here with my friend today. Sorry, but not sorry."
Yeah, and then I remember at one point they moved us to like a bottom balcony on a corner, if you remember that. And then that opened us up to sit with a couple young ladies as well at one point. So it was kind of it opened some doors for us, some opportunities.
Yep.
And
Like, I got some status now.
we got some status. Yeah, but we were the only ones. Again, we were the youngest ones by far. Like we were probably everybody was probably in their 40s or older. And so being teenager was pretty interesting. I had a lot of fun doing that. So Chris, now let's move into some of the jobs that were not so great. Not so
Yeah,
great.
my least favorite one was probably being a youth leader while I was still a youth.
Yeah, yeah.
Which was kind of like now it's a little bit more of like a prevalent thing to like have youth actually kind of be leaders or like run tech or like do whatever. But I remember there was like a small group of us because I really think really and truly what it was the youth pastor didn't have enough adult leaders. So he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna tap on the youth." So I remember being a youth leader, and most of that was I just functioned in like the tech team world, so it was either running lyrics or running sound or running lights. And I remember doing that, but I didn't enjoy it because I had to be there for like all the Wednesday nights. I had to be there for all like the special event weekends, like all that stuff when we did retreats. And it was just exhausting because it was kind of like you're a youth, but you're also a leader, but there's no like training or development or anything like it's like, okay, you just do this. And so I know what you guys are probably thinking. It's like, well, why didn't you just say no or just do only one thing? But like at that church, what we were taught was that like in order to prove your love for God, you have to serve, 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 serve. So like the more you serve, like that's you proving like you're holy, I guess. And that was maybe they didn't explicitly say that, but that's kind of how they treated it for sure.
Yeah, and this came a lot from my parental units, but this was also said in the church as well, is when you would get done with something, they're like, "You did a great job. Your reward will be in heaven." Like I remember that was a whole thing. It's like your reward
Not
will be
even
in heaven.
food or like nothing.
Yeah, it's like great job. That's your payment. Like your reward will be in heaven. And so, but yeah, that was the hard thing was, Chris and I, we really learned the tech world out of just sheer necessity, just like, okay, we have to do this. So we have to figure out how to get it good because if not, I mean, you're still getting chewed out. Like you're still getting chewed out. And I remember I started off, where did you start off? I started off at lyrics. Like that's where I started off.
Like, are you talking about serving in general or just in the tech world?
In the tech world. We'll start with tech world.
So when I actually first started off, it was running lyrics and lights for kids ministry. I
Yeah.
don't know if you remember that brief little stint. It was actually while your parental unit was the interim kids pastor, and then the next two kids, actually next three kids pastors, I was serving in kids. Well, I didn't realize I served in kids ministry for that long, and it was kind of like I was not about kids ministry, which is funny now because I'm a kids pastor.
Right?
I was like, I kind of was either doing tech or I was doing crowd control. That's
Yeah,
really what
same.
it was. So I think I started with the lyrics. And what it first was, the lyrics were behind the stage. So, like, when you
Yeah.
ran the computer, you had a little monitor of what was on the screen. But then I think they were like, it's probably better if you're kind of from behind the stage so you can actually see what's going on and actually see that. So I started with that. And then I remember I started with lights and I ran lights and I remember them doing a whole training on like this is how you run the soundboard, this is how you can make the lights move, this is how you can do this and that. So I did lyrics, I did lights, and then I did a little bit of sound, but like on a smaller soundboard. They didn't really let me run the big one that was in the gym because it was like a nice fancy one. And so they
Yeah,
tried to adults run that.
it was big and complicated. Going back to youth, I'm sorry, that was a rabbit trail. But
Yep,
going
sorry.
back to youth, no, you're fine. You're fine. Because I didn't realize this, but I actually started over there as well. But I remember getting into youth. And so you move from children's to youth in sixth grade. So, like, the transition from fifth to sixth grade is when I went from the children's ministry, like being a part of the kids' ministry, into youth. And what was kind of interesting is, like, the moment I crossed over into being sixth grade, it's like, okay, now you get to work for kids. Like, you
Yeah.
get to work in the kids
Yep.
ministry.
Which
And
is
so, like,
weird.
which is weird. Yeah, because it immediately switched. It was like a week ago I was sitting in the crowd here. Next week I'm working here. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so just like Chris, I started with crowd control and doing all of that. And then for youth, again, going back to what was hard was, I think it was, okay, you run all this stuff for kids. Now I see, like, hey, you can run this for youth as well. I think where I was disappointed talking about youth was when we were in the kids ministry portion of it and we did Wednesday nights and things like that. The youth ministry seemed really cool. And what I mean by that is they try to make it very much, and this was early 2000s, so they try to make it very much edgy, that sort of thing. They brought in bands sometimes. Like, I remember they brought in this band called the Laffy Taffy Band. Do you remember that? It
Yeah.
was literally, it was like a Christian Willy Wonka themed, like, grunge band. Like, seriously. And so the for the time, that was like very edgy and like, man, that's pretty crazy. I remember they had bouncers that was like, okay, no parents, no kids allowed. So, like, literally it was just for youth. And so they almost made it like an exclusive club atmosphere. For some reason, when we got there, all of that had gone away. Like, the leadership was the same somewhat.
Uh,
We had a church split, and so I think a lot of that went with that.
okay.
But
Okay. When you got there, it went away. My first year, it was still the same.
it was still
Yeah,
like
it
that.
was still like that. But by the time you got there, they kind of were, they still did like parties once a month, but they were really transitioning away from the party every Wednesday night being a party type deal to we're gonna actually do like they kind of almost overcorrected to where every
I
night
see.
is gonna be a
And
spiritual.
again, just going back, failed the fourth grade twice. So he got in a year earlier than I did. So he got to see that a year earlier for me. So for me, it was kind of a disappointment. And again, just like with the whole kids ministry thing, it was almost like, instead of like graduating from youth and like, congratulations, you get to work in youth, now it's like, congratulations, you get to work in youth and be a part of the youth.
Yeah.
And so that was really, really hard because it was, I remember there was a lot of times to where you were still had the expectation of like, well, hey, why are you not worshiping a certain way? It's like, well, dude, I'm running the soundboard, or hey, I'm running lyrics, or hey, I'm doing this. Or there would be other times where it's like, hey, I want you to come up on stage. Like, I remember there was a few times it's like, you come up on stage, and it's like, dude, I'm running something, or I'm, participating in something and I'm having to work something. And so I think that was probably why it was hard. And I think that's, alluding to that. I think that's why it was really, really hard, is because having to do both, um, you never really felt like you were a part of the crowd. You always felt like, okay, I'm working. And then all of a sudden it's like, but you want me to be a part of the crowd. And I have the same expectations as everybody else, but I'm doing double of everybody or
Yeah.
triple of everybody.
Yeah, that and I think that's a I think you kind of unlocked that or put the nail on the head because was like, hey, we want you to be a part of the youth, but you're also expected to be at this high level of leadership. And I granted, like some of that was just we had a hard work ethic, and I think maybe that helped create or that was part of the reason why there was some resentment, maybe a little bit, because like I felt like they were always focusing like on the new kids or maybe the kids that weren't like in leadership and like I was a leader but also youth and so I didn't feel like I was poured into like I did in small group, but it was that weird dynamic of, hey, you're gonna be serving at this, and you're gonna be a high level leader at this, and we're expecting you. They were almost treating the youth leaders or holding them to the same expectation as the adult youth leaders, if that makes sense. And that's really hard. It's like yeah, if you're a leader and you're a youth leader and you're a aged youth leader, you better not be struggling with lust. It's like, but I'm 13 and I'm a 14-year-old boy. Like, there's all these new things in middle school.
Yeah, exactly. This is all brand new to me. I've got no idea. I've got all these hormones like
Yeah.
going crazy and everything else, and now I'm also being expected to work and work really hard. Um, and then so going to another front, you were talking about having to do the events on the weekends and things like that. I'm going to go into the encounters. We have these things called encounters. And so that for me, I hated. Like I appreciate what they stood for. And basically what an encounter was just what it sounds like. They called it an encounter weekend where you encounter God. And basically they start off with essentially, I don't know why. It's almost like a God boot camp in a way, because
It's
like
a spiritual lock-in. I will say that. Like a
it's a
spiritual lock-in.
but I just remember, so you had to take a class going into it, the
Uh-huh.
pre-encounter class, and it kind of prepped you for what's coming. The church that we went to was very charismatic, and so they expected, they were very much about speaking in tongues, that sort of thing. And so they wanted you to, and a lot of the times it was pushed like, hey, if you've never spoken in tongues, this is probably going to be the weekend that this happens. Like the Holy Spirit will be there. This is probably where this is going to happen. And so this is where we're going to prep you for all of these things. So you go through the pre-encounter class and then you go through the encounter. I don't know about you, but actually I went through my encounter and essentially, and there was nothing wrong with it going through it. Like
Yeah,
there's
that's
nothing
what I was
wrong
gonna
with
say.
it going
I was
through.
gonna ask you, I was like, did going through it, like, was it okay for you? Like, it was.
I think what was hard was I went through mine too soon, at too early of an age, because I think just like anything, and we're getting a lot into philosophical sort of thing here, but people who baptize their kids at like 2, 3 years old, sometimes that's too early,
Yeah, they're
right?
not
They
like
don't
they're not understanding what
they
they're.
don't understand what's going on. And just like we were going through hormones and doing all sorts of stuff like this, I remember a lot of what it was more geared towards people who were in high school, later high school,
Yeah.
and getting into college,
Middle
young adult
schooler.
land.
Well, I don't know. I feel like, and maybe I was just at a different, I don't know, maybe level. I felt like for me, I was like, okay, I understood what I was doing and like I understood what I was going through. But I think to let a sixth grader or even seventh grader go through it, I think probably not. And then I think maybe they realized that, and then that's when they added later like the middle school retreat. Because like really and truly this weekend, like it was all like very heavy spiritual topics. There was like no fun events, no fun games. Like it was like the goal of this is to get closer to God, which I appreciate the heart behind it, everything. But when it first
It
started,
was intense. Yeah.
yeah, when it first started, it was okay, you get there Friday afternoon, you spend the night Friday night, all day Saturday, Saturday spend the night, then you have Sunday morning. It used to be all day Sunday. I was
Yeah.
still part of the
When I
people.
went through it, it was all day
It was
Sunday.
all day.
When I
So
went
then
through it, it was
all
all
day
day.
Sunday, you like go through all these classes, all that. And then by the time encounter is done, they have Sunday night service. So you're like, that's the end of it. And I was like, bro, like that's a long week. Like that's your whole weekend.
Yeah, it was a long weekend. When I went through mine, I was in the sixth grade. I was um like 11 or 12. Like I was 11 or 12 when I went through mine. And the first day that you go through it, they make you think about, they literally say, okay, we want you to think about your entire life and basically your parents, all the sins that you've committed to this point, everything you struggled with. Like they even gave a piece of paper and said, write down everything that you struggled with and like make a timeline of all of this stuff. So basically, it's very reflective at first. Like it's very reflective. And reason I called it boot camp was because, a lot of times in boot camp, they like break you down. And I felt like that first day was almost like breaking you down for the things to come. Not really, but that's what it felt like, at least for me at the time, because you feel really bad. You're like, man, And especially as a sixth grader, because a sixth grader, I'm just like, again, probably the stuff I'm writing down would just be laughable at this point of just like, okay, sure.
Some
Because
of
I'm
it was
like,
like, have you ever played with fire? And it was
well,
like,
and that's what I was gonna say. It's like I lit a fire in my backyard, right? It's like I strung a frog up and made a catapult out of it. It's like, stuff like that. But it was okay. And they did have some prompts on there that was okay. That was like, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Like, and these are things, and here's the scriptural basis behind it. And so I remember going through that Saturday all day. It's session after session. Like there is a media session that it talks about the current music, the current
mine was on
movies, the
Sunday
current
morning, the media sessions. Like the lighter
media
ones
sessions.
were on Sunday morning for me. Maybe they changed it whenever, but the intense ones were like, that's when they talked about like sexuality and like all that stuff on Saturday. And then like they had the session of like the cross session where it was like, okay, like Jesus took all those bad things that you did, right? And we would have to watch the Passion of the Christ. And it was like
Yeah.
making you think about all the things that Jesus took on your sins. And then they didn't do this as I got later, but then at the end of that session, it's like, okay, I'm free. God has set me free from those things. Now I'm going to take the paper and I'm going to burn it because that's God. And then I don't know how yours was, but during the night, there was another session. No, never mind. That was later. That's when they adjusted the format. But then it was like, then the last session I went through was like the Holy Spirit session where they were like they really were wanting you, and they preached that unless you speak in tongues, you're not filled with the Holy Spirit. And so that whole session would last like till whenever. It lasted a really long time.
And just to give an insight to it, it's not like they were sitting here like, here's how to speak in tongues and like this is how to do it. It was more like, okay, when you're ready for it, this is how it's going to happen. This is how it's going to feel. This is how you know it's going to be real. And not just that, but the heavy piece to it was that's when they introduced for me the whole blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. It's like, now if you've spoken in tongues and you say like, nah, that never happened, that's like the unforgivable sin that you will definitely go to hell and there is no reconciling your soul for. Now, did they explain that 100% great to me? Because for a while I'm sitting here like even I sit here right now and I'm like, should I even be talking about this? It's like I could be losing my soul because I'm talking about this, And I don't know. There was, again, I think for a sixth grader, the topics were so heavy that it was like, if I was an adult, I could probably read between the lines of what they were saying,
Yeah,
but
or
just
a
seeing
late
it
high schooler, yeah.
yeah, but seeing it so point blank and so in your face, it was it was terrifying. So essentially what happened for me after I went through the encounter is I remember a few things happened. So I'm in middle school, right? I played football in middle school. I would go to church on Sundays. I would go to school and I wouldn't say badly, but I would say bad words, right? Like I would say regular curse words and things like that. And I remember being like, I got to stop that. Like I got to stop that immediately. Like I got to stop that. I got to be a light. Like, and I got to tell all my friends that they're living wrong. Like I remember that was like the whole thing. And so not just that, but I even had this teacher who she was from a charismatic background as well. And I had told her like, hey, I went through this encounter weekend and whatnot. And she was like, how can I help you in your faith? And I was just like, she kind of was like, she told me no to this. And I always was like, why? But I was like, can I come in your room in the morning and speak in tongues? And she's like, no. She's like, and I was like, I need a place to speak in tongues and like pray over this place before we come in here. And she's like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, what? And
could you imagine just a little sixth grade boy coming out into your classroom? That's great.
And I was just like, and so, but I was just sitting here and I think the main problem was it kind of perpetuated a lot of guilt because it's not a sustainable lifestyle. People are flawed, right? And especially you get around those people, you get around your friends, you get around whatever. And so the moment I told my friends like, hey, living wrong, I can't curse anymore. The first thing they want to do is bait me into cursing. They're like, oh, we're going to make them curse by the end of the day. And I was just like, this is the Satan temptations they're talking about, and like really, really and truly, it really wasn't like, it was just kids being kids. But again, I think that it was just too soon for me. And so I just remember it being like something else that was said on that encounter was, you know, you always hear about the camel hair in the eye of the needle and stuff like that, and getting into heaven, it's so hard. I remember the youth pastor saying, you know, essentially, when you sin, like right now, you're in the same room with God. When you sin, there is a door between you, and like there's still a window that he could talk to you from, but the more you sin, the more you move backwards from that, and that door is like you're getting into heaven. And so essentially how I took that is, oh, you sin once, like he's taking that eraser, boy, and like the Lamb's Book of Life, you out of that sucker, you know. And so for the longest time I'm like, oh man, I sin once, I curse once, like God sitting there with the eraser going and getting that thing out of there. And so I think what was hard was going into a little further. I didn't realize we were going to talk about the encounter and go full on into that. But I think what was hard was immediately after that, the very next encounter, it's like, by the way, you're working the next encounter. Like you're working the
Yeah.
next encounter.
Well,
And so go ahead.
it was after your encounter, then you had to go through you had to go through your post encounter class. And then after your
Right.
post, if you wanted to be a leader, and they were like, you want to be a leader. So if you want to be a leader, now you got to go through these discovery level classes. You got to go through 1 through 2 and through 3 before you can be like, and 3 was like the highest. But what was weird was it wasn't just youth going through these classes, it was adult leaders going through these classes too.
It was
So
everybody.
it was like, okay, if you want to be a leader in our youth group, you need to go through these classes. And so also too, once you go through these classes, now the expectation is you do have to serve these encounter weekends.
Well, see, but the thing for me was I was still in these discovery classes. I was still in discovery level 1, and I'm having to work this encounter. Like I was still having to work that. And I think what was hard was, and I think why I got roped into that was talking about another ministry that I was working in was the homeless ministry in the kitchen. And we worked every Saturday in the kitchen. And so part of what happened was in these encounters, they fed you 3 square meals a day because you know you're locked in. And so Friday night you had a meal, 3 on Saturday, and then when it was Sunday it was all day, so it was 2 meals, but still. And so they had to have people in the kitchen. And so I think that's why I was like, all right, you're back in there. And what was hard for me though was they would still expect you to attend certain sessions. So even though you were working, and again, being in the kitchen was hard. It was a hard job because you on Friday, you know, you come in there, you have to be there early, you have to prep, you have to serve dinner, and then you have to clean up everything, get everything prepped for the morning. You get up at like 5 in the morning because the first session starts at 8. Like food was at like 7:30. So you're doing that. You get cleaned up. By the time you get done with that, then it's lunch. You get lunch, you get all that cleaned up. And then it's like, oh, by the way, we got to start prepping for dinner. And they're like, after dinner, we want you in the cross session. Like I remember that was the biggest one that they wanted you. And that was always the most intense one. Cause again, you're watching the Passion of the Christ. You just watch Jesus get beat. And now you're going to eat some lasagna. I remember they always serve spaghetti for dinner those nights. And like, that's kind of wrong. I mean, it's like, that's pretty wrong. Anyways, so I don't know. I think a lot of it, and where a lot of that resentment came from, long story short, going through the whole rabbit hole of the encounter and whatnot is, and I had to work through a lot of other encounters and things like that going through there, was it wasn't just working the job. It was, okay, you're expected, again, to be a part of the youth. You're expected to go through these certain sessions, you're expected to do way more than the average bear.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, you're going to be there late and wake up early. So like you could be done like, and there was no time to like take naps, definitely. Cause there was
No.
all through, but then it was like, okay, now you're not go to bed till like midnight. Cause I remember, and then two, I remember working a couple of encounters. And so I was doing tech, but when I wasn't doing tech, I was like helping set up stuff or tear down stuff. And then it was like, okay, now that you're not doing tech, you have to go to bed at midnight. And then you got to wake up at 5 a.m. because you have to help get all the air mattresses rolled up, put away. You got to clean because they're having church that morning. Like, so you got to get
And
ready.
so you got to clean the classrooms out because they got Sunday school going. And not just that, but brings to another good point. You also had to put yourself out because everybody who's attending the encounter, they would have shower times. Like they had a girls and boys bathroom, right? And they had showers and stuff like that. And so naturally, after a long day, especially like myself in the kitchen, and dude, I sweat like crazy. Like just drop of the hat, I put my pants on in the morning, I'm like sweating. And so I'm just like drenched in sweat. I'm nasty. I don't want to go to bed like that. But what they would always tell you is they would have these shower sign up sheets, but the volunteers would have to go last. Like you would have to go last. And what did that mean? Like most people wouldn't be done since the last session didn't get done till 10:30, 11 o'clock. Sometimes it's like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. And then you're having to turn around at 4, get back up, start prepping for breakfast. Like it was rough. Like it was a rough weekend. Like every time it was incredibly rough. Like you just knew, man, like this is about to
You want
be.
to you want to tell the story about the showers?
So yeah, we had to have our fun, right? Like we had to have our fun. And so something that I did was, I don't know why I did this because it was funny. But I used to make like these sex noises while going to the bathroom just to like screw with people and see what would happen. And so I remember I was standing there and there was two people that I got. And one was the worship leader at the time, and he was like in the shower. And so I go up to the urinal and like I'm going to the bathroom and I like start pounding on the wall. I'm like, oh, yeah, oh God, yeah. And like I'm just like just being stupid. And I remember like he turned off the water and like kind of I just saw like his feet kind of like go towards the front, like he was hiding. Like I don't want to know what's going on. Like I'm just gonna stay away from there. And then the other person that I got was the youth pastor himself, and so I did that with him, and he was not so subtle. He burst out that door butt naked, and he's like, "What are you doing over here?" Like he started chewing me out, and I'm just like, "Oh my God!" Like it was so bad. It was just like God, and like he used to tell this sermon about being pigeon chested as a kid and all this other stuff, and I was just like, "Oh yeah, I see what they're talking about." Like, please go away. But yeah, it was you had to have your fun. Like you had to have your fun where you could. But I remember getting absolutely just chewed out for that one.
Yeah, and
God.
I think it was too, like, again, you hit the nail on the head. Like anytime we served in that area or had to do anything, it was like you're going, but you're having to serve. Like even when we went on the, like, they called it Frozen Chosen. And I don't know if that was supposed to be a leader retreat because I remember like younger kids going and it was really weird. But they were like, okay, yeah, you got to go for Frozen Chosen, and you're supposed to be in here for like this leadership retreat. But at the same time, you also need to be like helping clean up. You got to be setting the beds. You got to be making the sheets for everybody. Even on the Six Flags trip, it was like, okay, you're in leadership. So we want you to be in the service, but now you have to like tear down at the end of the night. Like all the other kids, they can go to their rooms, but like all the leadership people, like you, if you're a team leader, you got to tear down and everything. And it was
It's
just
like
like,
you gotta it's like the band's going back to Augusta, so you gotta load the truck up, you gotta go load them up, you gotta tear down the room, you gotta and it was just always constantly something. And again, there was no not like you're looking for rewards or things like that, but there was no attaboys or anything like that. Like, hey, we appreciate your help. Again, I think that's where a lot of our problems had stemmed from was it was like your reward will be in heaven. Like this is what you're supposed to do. And after a while, you're just sitting here going, and a lot of what ended up happening in that youth group was there was a group of people that came in, and they were the popular clique, and they wouldn't do those things. Like they didn't do the extras, but they got a lot of the benefits of that. Like I remember they got into leadership without going into the school of discovery and doing level 1, level 2, so like we're over here busting our humps and they're the ones getting the benefits of everything. They got the attaboys, they got taken to lunch by the youth pastor, like they got a lot of this stuff, and we're sitting here like, what are we, chopped liver? And meanwhile, not just that, but Chris and I had big hearts too. Like we'd see these kids come into youth, and it's always scary when you're in an environment where you don't know anybody. Like you don't know anybody. And so we always took it upon ourselves to be like, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm Micah, this is Chris. Like, how's it going? Where do you go to school? Like, what's your name? Like, just trying to be nice and just being like, if you want to come sit with us, like, that's cool. And typically it was always like, now we got to run like sound and lights, but if you want to sit right here, like, we'll hang out with you a little bit after we get done with that. And like, we always took it upon ourselves to do that sort of thing. And that other group would not even like, they would treat those people just horribly, like on the
Yeah.
outside. And so for a lot of times we felt like outsiders, but we had to be like we were outsiders, but we had to work really, really hard and do all the work for the people who were in this clique and in this group. And so I think that's where a lot of it ended up stemming from. And so I think all of that to lead to that was just, I think that's what made it hard was not just you had to be a part of the youth group, you had to do the work, but then it was for people that were ungrateful. And I think that was the really, really hard part.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like you're doing that, you're doing youth, then you're doing homeless ministry, then you're doing ushering, then like all at the same time. And so it's like, yeah, it's probably part of it is like on our fault where like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have just said yes to too many things. But that was kind of thing. Somebody asked you to do something, you just say yeah. And I was sitting back there thinking, I was like, man, like, I also didn't realize like I had served in kids ministry longer than I thought, because I was there for,
Yeah.
like, 3 kids pastors. So I was there for, like, 3 years, and granted, was I the most consistent? No. But I was like, "Wow." I did, like, 3 did you ever help lead a VBS or no?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't lead one, but I assisted in a few. And then shoot, I mean, this probably was because my paternal unit was heavily involved in children's, like with the very first children's pastor that we had. But I mean, I remember every single Sunday, even at the age of 8 years old, we had these things called jumpstart groups. And I remember like we had these divider walls and things like that. We would always go in there early, stay both services. We'd have to set up those divider walls. We'd have to take those down. And even though I wasn't leading the group, it was like I had to go through both services, hear the lessons twice. You had to
Yeah.
do all that. So you feel like, I mean, you feel like you're in leadership almost because you're sitting here doing again more than most, and you see the behind the scenes. I feel like anytime you see the behind the scenes, you feel like, oh yeah, I know this song and dance a little better than everybody else, I think.
Yeah, I helped with 3 VBSs. Well, so when I say VBS, Vacation Bible School, I did tech for 1, like, and I remember my whole job was I edited the videos, I ran lyrics, all that good stuff. And then when I wasn't doing that, I would go and get video footage and like do some interviews of the kids and all that stuff. There's actually a YouTube video a recap video that I made that's still on YouTube right now.
What wasn't that the Hope Harbor one?
No, that's what it got changed into. And then I remember when I first started, I think my mom helped in kids ministry for like that one event, and then I think that's how I got stuck, because I remember it was a Willy Wonka themed Sunday,
Yeah,
and it was like Willy Wonka everything. The kids pastor dressed up as Willy Wonka. There was candy everywhere, like
I remember that.
everything. And so it was like, yeah, and that's when I first learned how to do lyrics. And then I think I did like snacks and games for like, I remember being a floater for one VBS of just like helping clean up and helping be a floater. And so, yeah, it was just like, hey, this is what we do. We serve. And as much as it was like, a lot. I am thankful for those times, because I remember there were some good moments like with my family of us serving together. And then it was like, who knew that would have prepared me for ministry now?
What you're doing now,
What
yeah.
I'm doing now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and there was a lot that was good. There was a lot of good moments, and so kind of what we were talking about in the intro, and we've somewhat alluded to this already. For me, it has drawn a lot of there was a lot of animosity towards the church for a long time and trying to find where I truly fit in, because even now it's very hard to go to church and not be involved. And I'm not just talking involved, I'm talking heavily involved. Like it's not just one thing. Like even if I get involved in one thing, I don't feel like that's enough. Like I feel like,
yeah.
okay. And I think a lot of that had to do with, and it is very true. After a while, the church started And when we were a part of a lot of these teams, they started calling it the dream team, which was like a culmination of all the teams. And
Uh-huh.
I remember a lot of what they were saying is, 90% of the church sits in the pews, 10% are making the show happen and making the things happen. And it was very, very true. And I think a lot of it was, and maybe you didn't feel this way, but I always felt like it was almost like the people that were part of the 10% look down on the people of the 90 because it's like, well, they're just lazy and they just reap the benefits. And so a lot of the times whenever I'm seeing this sort of thing, and again, the whole your reward will be in heaven, and even the whole teachings of, I mean, what does that insinuate? There was also teachings that like, yeah, you do more, you get your mansion filled up with all sorts of stuff, right? But even the whole your reward will be in heaven, what does that insinuate? It means like, hey, what you did just added you stuff, right? So if you're just sitting in the pew just listening, that's not adding you anything, that's not getting you anything when you get up there. That's literally just getting you like, hey, you went to church. And a lot of times what was preached too, and this is true too, but again, I think at the age we were taught, I didn't quite understand this, is going to church every Sunday doesn't mean anything. Like that doesn't necessarily mean anything unless you have a relationship with Christ. Now, how I equated that, especially when you're talking about a lot of work going into it and the work getting you things, it still feels like, okay, you just going to church and getting spiritually fed is not enough for you to be in the favor of the eyes of God. Like that's still a problem that I'm having to get around, I guess, so to say. And what's hard for me is going to church and somebody asking me like, hey, would you want to serve in this? Like I feel that obligation still of like, you have to say yes. If you say no, you're a piece of crap for that. Like you're not worthy of being here because you're just the 90% sitting in the pew. So saying all of that, did you have any of those experiences too?
Yeah, I would say so. So like it was weird it's still weird for me to just like go to church. Like I can do it one Sunday, and granted, I'm on church staff now, but like when I wasn't on church staff, to just go to church and then like not do multiple things and to not serve in a big way, because that's just a part of like who I am, and like I've learned. Like I find a restlessness, and it doesn't come from a have to do this. It's just like I want to do this now. Of like I can't just show up. There is part of it that's nice where I can just show up and then go home afterwards. But I
Yeah.
did that for like 6 months. And then I was like, no, like I need to serve. And it's not from an obligation. It's like, hey, I don't need to just sit on the sidelines type deal. But I think I found that healthy balance in being like, okay, you know what? Like maybe I am a person who wants to serve every week, but I also know my limitations and my capacity. It is I think serving in that aspect did help me build a lot of that capacity, because when I was serving in kids ministry when I wasn't on staff, I was like, man, like I don't want to just serve every other week. Like I want to serve every week. And then I got to a point where I was like, hey, I really do need to take a break. Like this is really starting to burn me out. So I think it's healthy. And I think going through that has helped me a lot as a staff member, because I remember the way that I felt when I wasn't appreciated, when I was burned out, when I was like carrying the load. And now I want to make sure my volunteers don't ever have to go through that. So I think you have to come to a healthy balance of, yeah, like it's okay for me to go into church and sit, but I don't have to serve in every single area. Like I think it's helpful to pick one area and be like, yeah, I'm going to serve every other week, and that's twice a month, and that's okay.
Yeah. And not sit there and be like the sin of sloth. You're just sitting here
And I
and it's just, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I think a
Go ahead.
lot of it too was just being more mature. And as an adult, you look at things with 2020 vision, right? 2020 is always clear. But I think it was more of a, I'm putting my identity and my salvation of what I can do, instead of like just resting in the grace of what Jesus has already done for me. And it's like, the Bible does say without like works, your faith is dead, right? Faith without works is dead. And so you do have to get to a part where you're not just a consumer, but you're a contributor. But at the same time, too, that doesn't help your eternal destiny. It doesn't help God love you more. Like you working and trying to do all that, like, I had to really wrestle with, like, hey, what I do does not determine, like, my salvation, or what I do doesn't determine my value to God. And it is a hard thing to wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of it is, I think, and if there's anybody out here, I'm sure there's a ton of people who relate to what we're talking about and, identify to some spectrum of where we're hitting at right here. But, there is a lot of guilt. There's a lot of guilt that goes into it. And there's a lot of guilt, even on the front of, hey, if you're not serving, you're not actively helping people get into, not helping people into the grace of God. And I think so logically, so it's hard because you have your emotional side, you have your logic side, right? And sometimes those two things do not sync up. Sometimes logically you know something, emotionally it's screaming the opposite direction, and it's really hard. I think what's really hard is logically, I know, hey, it's not about what goes on just inside the four walls of the church. If they've already made it to the church, they're already wanting to make some sort of change themselves, or maybe they're listening to a family member, or somebody is sowing a seed somewhere to already get them to that place. And because what you're talking about and going to church and, the feeling that I need to serve every Sunday is like, okay, if you don't, you're letting somebody down somewhere, whether that is a church leader, whether that is somebody who is needing of salvation today, or whatever the case is, you're letting somebody down somewhere. And so there's a guilt aspect to that. When logically, it's, hey, it's not all about what goes on in the four walls of the church. Yes, there's that, but a lot of what it is we've talked about, it talks about salt and light, right? You don't want to beat people over the head with the Bible, but at the same time, you still want to be a good person to where people identify that, hey, something is different about you. There's something different about you. You've got a light about you. And I think that a lot of it is, I'm not saying don't go to church and don't volunteer and things like that, but I think a lot of it has to do with who you choose to be and how you choose to follow Christ. And you're not necessarily letting people down if you don't go and you don't do those things. Again, I think, if that makes any sense, I think what's hard is you have the logic side of you that's like, hey, I understand that it's not all about the works. I understand that it's about who you are as a person, and people will see the difference. For example, when we left Georgia for Texas, like, I didn't think people saw me any different because, again, a lot of what I struggled with, especially towards the end of our tenure at that church, was burnout. We were doing a whole bunch of other things besides church as well. And I remember going to school, and it was kind of like I was living double life, right? Like, you would have your church life, and I was a youth leader and I was doing all this stuff. And then I'd go to school and I'd still have a potty mouth. I'd still run my mouth. I'd still do some crazy stuff. And I remember when I left, I had all these people come up to me and they said, Micah, like, you always like mentored me, and you've always been like a really godly influence and all this other stuff. And it was so mind-blowing because I was sitting here going, really? Like, I didn't think that I was that person to you. I thought I lived this totally separate life over here. And it's like, no, just because you were behaving how the church was telling you was poorly, they still saw who you were and who you were in God, and how you let God influence you through that path. And again, it taught me, like, hey, because a lot of what church had taught me to that point was, if you're going to minister to somebody, you have to always be like, well, God wouldn't want you to do that, or you should go to church, or you should whatever. And I wasn't saying those things, so I didn't think that I was having any influence on anybody godly, any sort of godly influence. But it showed that, no, your behaviors, even though sometimes you let a few words rip. Did you talk crap about a few people? Yeah. Did you do things that maybe God would be like, dude, that's not cool. You shouldn't do that. That's a bad influence. Yeah. But at the same time, these people were like, man, something's different about you. And I can tell that it's God. And so I think that, all that coming to, there's a lot of lessons learned in a lot of those things. And so it's still a struggle of finding out that, hey, it's more about what you are, who you are, your improvement, who you are, trying to be Christ-like, versus the church. I guess that, again, it's that separation of religion versus being a Christian. There's a totally
Yeah.
different thing to that.
I think I think too, like when you have Christ come in and transform your life, like truly transform, there's a period, yeah, he's working on you, but like to have Christ like transformation, you're gonna want to share that or serve somebody in some way. It may not be at the church of the four walls, right? But like the church is not the building. The church, right, is the body of Christ. And so if you are having, hey, I want to be more Christ-like, so I'm going to serve this person by praying for them, or hey, I'm going to go serve this guy by giving him a meal on the street, or hey, and that's all I do and no one ever knows about it. Like that's still serving someone, right? Like
Yeah.
and so it's just interesting. And what's also interesting too, like being in the church world, now the pendulum from when I was serving has swung the other way post COVID. Now no one is wanting to serve. Everyone is like, you know what? Like it's almost a consumer mindset. Like it's like as long as me and my family are good, like we're gonna come consume and then we're gonna peace out. But like I'm not saying you have to serve like in the church, but serve somebody, like serve someone at the
Yeah.
prison or serve, I don't know what it is. But I wanted to ask you because last year, like you helped me with our Easter production, right? Like for
Yeah.
my church. And like more than just serving the kids, which you did, you were like helping your friend out, which was serving, and you didn't have to, and I appreciate it. But was it weird for you to be back in that space, or or how did you feel about it, or was it just kind of like, hey, I'm just helping my buddy Chris out?
No, it wasn't weird. And I think a lot of it has to do with, yeah, it was for my buddy Chris. For those of you who don't know, so we've come from a Pentecostal, apostolic, charismatic background, and I went more the Lutheran route. I'm still finding my true ideology per se, but Lutheran's where I've landed currently. And actively going to a church, I wouldn't say so as far as like, yeah, we watch every Sunday online, but I don't consider that actually going. Like, yeah, listening, sure. Do I listen to preachers on the radio? Sure. Do I read my Bible? Yes. More like audiobook it because I found that that way works a little better for me. This is totally off topic. This is where I think I have ADHD because reading anything, especially like the Bible, I'll get like a line in and my mind will just start running and I'll keep reading, but I'll realize that I'm like thinking about something totally different or I'm thinking about maybe that initial line and I'm not actually reading the rest of what I'm doing. I'm going, okay, hold on.
Yep,
Focus.
that's me.
And
Yep.
like I'm having to like focus. So audiobooks work a lot better for me so that it keeps going and I'm just listening. But anyways, so at that point, even a year ago, I had gotten back into it where I'm just like, okay, I'm going to focus on just having a relationship with Christ. Screw all the rest of the stuff. Let's just start from the basics. Let's just have a relationship with Christ. Let's not worry about the rest of it. And so when that opportunity came about, it was a lot of it was just, yeah, I want to help my buddy Chris out because when Chris called me and he said, hey, I've got this, partner potentially that I'm going to do this show with. Do you mind reading the script over with me? And I read the script and I was just like, bro, if we're being real, this script was made for the both of us. Like this was a script that it really needs to be the both of us. I looked up plane tickets. This is how you know it's a God thing. I looked up plane tickets. It was cheap enough. They were already coming down to San Antonio the next week to drive down. So I was like, man, the dates are going to work out. Screw it. Let's do it. As long as your church is okay with it, that's fine. And so going back into that space, no, it wasn't hard because the belief is still there. Knowing who Christ is still there, especially on a big day like Easter. And the fact that I think if it would have been the traditional Easter deal, especially like for kids, I think it would have been different. But the way that, and just to let everybody know, Chris did his Easter program a lot different. He had a visual representation of, he did a little cross number where it cleansed the sins.
I did a big magic trick.
Yeah, he did a big magic trick. He did do the story of Jesus getting crucified and but it was all in neon glowing lights. So like there was some good stuff and then essentially he and I, like I was DJ emceeing, and like he was also an MC as well. And we were just playing off each other and whatnot. And so I think if it would have been that typical, like, okay, now we're going to talk about the story of when Jesus was crucified, and like we went through that whole thing, I think it would have been a little different. But at the same time, I think it was because one, it was fun. The venue was not church like, yeah, it was kind of church like, but we were in the Crickets Theater, which is over at the Buddy Holly in Lubbock. So it's a bigger venue, right? And we had our own green room in the back. And so, it didn't have the same feel. You know what I mean? If it was maybe in a church, maybe it'd have been a little different, but at the same time, it felt natural. I don't know. I could still snap into that place and just be like, all right, we're serving. Great. Let's do this thing. And I think a lot of it, again, you know, because it was you, it's like, no question, let's do this thing. But
Yeah.
it wasn't weird.
I was curious. That was definitely, I would probably put it as number one, if not number two, of like my best moments, like doing ministry, my most favorite moments, just because number one, I put a lot of creativity in the show, but two, like it was fun doing it like with my best friend. Like, was it a lot of work and did I have a lot of headaches and all that? Yeah, but like thinking back on it, like it was just so fun to do all that. And then like the end of like seeing the kids like enjoy it on the back end and knowing like, hey, like what we were aiming for to teach the kids the gospel story in an interesting way really landed. And just to have your best friend be part of that with you, like that's like my number one favorite moment of ministry. So
Yeah. I think, I think next week for the old fashioned donut, I think that's a story we need to tell. We haven't told that one and like gone into detail with that. And it'll be a year.
Yeah.
It'll be a year.
Like a year.
So,
exactly. That's wild.
Yeah, that's crazy and we got to talk about how I got food poisoning a few days before and all sorts of stuff. So,
one last question, unless you got one last question. I got one last question. What, looking back on it, you can be like, okay, yeah, there was some of this bad, there was burnout, but like putting it all together, what lesson or like positive silver lining do you see out of all that time?
Basically, a lot of what I see is there's a lot of work ethic. Like I attribute a lot of the work ethic that I have right now to those times that we had before. On the other end of that, I learned how to say no. And that was a big lesson. And it was actually after I left the church for a bit that's when I, found that out, how to say no. But you have to go through the times where you say yes, 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 and burn out to then understand how to say no. So I think that was a lot of it. And then, it did teach me a lot of skills, a lot of skills. I'm in information technology as a career now. I'm not saying that running sound and running lyrics and things, but we did have to work on computers and we did have to do a lot of technical things. We did have to understand what cable is what. And we also had to understand, it just taught us things. It taught me a lot of leadership qualities as well, because listen, when you're thrust into a leadership role or into a role where you have to not only be a part of the ministry and work at the same time and be a leader with people who are your peers or even people who are older than you. Like right now, I have a job where the two people that I work with directly are older than me by like 20 years. And so it's understanding, how do you still relate to them? How do you get the best out of them, even though they're looking at you like, oh man, this is just a pimple faced little kid, like compared to everything that I've gone through, and I guess what's interesting is it doesn't sound like much, but even think about when you're in high school and think about when you're in middle school. Like if you're a sophomore in high school and you're talking to a senior is going to be like, dude, this kid's a sophomore. He doesn't know what the heck's going on. So in order to relate to him and say, okay, no, we're on the same playing field, or, hey, I need you to do this and here's how I need you to do it. And them actually be able to take that and, you actually exercise your leadership role to motivate them is hard. And so it's definitely equated into nowadays. So there's a lot that was good about it. There's a lot of lessons that came out of it for sure. How about yourself?
Kind of going back, I think it really did prepare me on how to be a staff member because
Yeah.
it's like, hey, there are times where it's like, we got to set this event up, but you're also expected to be part of the event. So it taught me the balance of how to do that. And then I think really, truly just how to appreciate people, how to love on volunteers and think of like, man, I want to make sure that this person isn't burned out. And then when someone is burned out or they are stretched too thin or you realize, hey, like you kind of need a break. You do it and you give them the opportunity to be like, hey man, I'm really noticing you probably need a break. Like, let me give you the permission to do that. And then I would say, I don't know, fun stories came out of it
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. But I think really and truly, it helped me be so well rounded just on the different things that we did. I don't know. As much as it was like, yeah, at the time you'll burn out, like I look on those times with fond memories because I made a lot of the most fun memories with my buddy Micah and the friends that were around. And so, like I said, it really taught me how to treat people and how to appreciate people and lead people. So,
And, you know, really and truly, out of pressure makes diamonds. And I think we were under a lot of pressure all the time. So it really helped out a lot. And not just that, but, you know, when you're in the trenches with people, you got to learn how to have fun. You got to learn how to laugh. And so I think that's where a lot of the fun times came. The last thing that I want to ask you, and this is kind of off now. So we did have a lot of good times. We did screw around. We did make some people mad over the years. Would you say, and this is kind of a different note, would you say that God's getting you back sevenfold in your kids' ministry for some of the things that we pulled back in the day?
yeah, for some of the youth ministry, when I started sixth grade boys, dude, I'm telling you, every week and that was what I forgot to say in the last question was like it made me appreciate my leaders so much. The youth leaders that led me, my kids pastors that led me. It's like thinking back on it, like some of those people, it's like, man, they were really just trying their best. And as flawed as they may be, or the things they didn't do, they were really just trying to figure it out on their own. And I'm kind of like
Yeah.
being at it's like, man, now I'm their age trying to help these kids. It's like, yeah, I had a lot of good memories as a kid in kids ministry. And so how can I recreate that for the times? But yeah, there's a lot of times where I'm like, bro, like, yep, that's
And
payback
just,
for this.
well, and just like we didn't have a training manual for a lot of things, they didn't get trained either. I
No.
guarantee they didn't get trained. They just got thrust into the spot and was like, good luck with that. And so, you know,
Yeah.
they did their best as well. And so, but yeah, man, it's been a good episode. I could talk all sorts of stuff. The one thing that I was not expecting to talk about this episode was the encounter experience. I
Yeah,
was not
that was
expecting to
a
talk about that.
crazy week. Like, okay, I know we're trying to end this segment, but let's go back to it just for a little.
Listen, we're gonna do the pastor thing where it's like, listen, I'm wrapping it up, I'm ending, and then we're gonna keep circling.
Okay, here's the thing. I appreciated though when they did do the middle school retreat, and they didn't do that till I was like in eighth grade. And so they realized very quickly, hey, this encounter stuff, this is very heavy, but we do need to do something that's targeted for the middle schooler. So they did have a middle school retreat, and a lot of that was like fun games, and they did do some
Some
spiritual
of it was dangerous, straight up dangerous.
They did do some spiritual lessons, but, like, the heaviest spiritual lesson we had already done, like, in the encounter weekend, and they had kinda taken that cross session, and they just tamed it down a couple notches, like and that was the ending note, but I remember having so much fun on that middle school retreat, and I'm glad that they
Yeah.
provided that because it was kind of the same but instead they did a Friday and Saturday instead of Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, and it was a lot less heavy. And then they split up every segment with a game or something. Like I remember there was, if you remember, there was like a Alka Seltzer like challenge where they like put Alka Seltzer in the mouth and like see how many you could have fizz up and all sorts of stuff. And the dangerous one that I was talking about was they had two kids put trash can like these plastic trash cans over their head, and they would like send them into the middle of the room with each other and smack into it. I actually remember this was my seventh grade year because you were still there. So this must have been like the first year they did it. And I remember like I made it all the way to the final round with this kid, Nick. And I remember I faded. It's because I was big as mess. Like I was the biggest kid there. And so I'd been slamming kids all day. And the secret was because I wasn't about to like get no concussion. I remember being in that trash can and like I put my like hands up like this and that way it like absorbed all the blow. Anyways, so I remember being this final round. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta beat this kid. And I remember running into the middle of the room and like smacking into him. And I like fell over and I was like, dang it, like I didn't win. And come to find out, like we both like smacked into each other, like both fell. So we like tied. But thinking about how dangerous that was, it's like, geez, that's
And they had
wild.
this game called the Grinder.
Oh God. Which nowadays that sounds horrible.
And
But
what they would do is, okay, they'd stick these kids in the middle and they put like, it was like this one big elastic band and it had like a belt you could put around your waist or whatever.
with like bungee cords like separating all four.
Yeah. And so everyone would go into 4 different directions. And the goal was you were trying to like, you had to take your shoes off, but like the goal was you're trying to get to your end where you grab the ball and then you win. But they would put like me and like this small kid named Zach with people like Micah and like that were like just giant beasts. And it was not but yeah.
I think that was the only times Chris really got mad with me was because I would always like win those things, and it's just like it's not fair. It's like I was getting really mad. But yeah, that was true. So that was pretty fun. The middle school retreats and stuff like that. So we did have some really good times. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. We had all in between there, but it shaped us into the people that we were today. But man, it's been a great episode. DOUGHNUT Box Pod over on YouTube, on Instagram. Go like us, follow, subscribe to us over there. We really appreciate all that. Again, I could talk on this episode. I think every episode I finish this off with like, man, I could talk about this for hours, but it's like, we'll wrap it up. Yeah, I do. Is that a surprise to you at all? It shouldn't be. But anyways, yeah, I do have the gift of gab and the gift of prophecy at times. Anyways, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So let's have the, I can't even talk. Let's have the starship take us out. I'm Micah.
And I'm Chris.
And this has been the special church edition of the Doughnut Box Podcast. All right. We'll talk to you later.